wonder if there's kind of maybe that's part of the secret sauce. Curtis, it's gonna be fun editing around this fly.
I know, right? I have a family, I have kids, and I want people that work with us to be the same way, to have other things outside of... It's in my cup, I think.
It is.
5 minutes of conversation.
It's in the fly show.
So we might just have to embrace it. I don't think that swats at it.
Oh, I almost lost it in the middle. I was like, this is gonna be funny. From OFS, I'm Doug Shapiro. This is the Imagine a Place podcast, where we explore the power of place and the role of design in our lives. Great. So happy you're here. As I was imagining our conversation, Christian, I thought of the words secret sauce, and I was like, maybe that will be the theme today.
Okay. All right, cool. Well, by the way, thank you for having me here and having the team here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a fun trip. We've been to Cool Springs. Right? Yeah. You had a chance to see us and see what we're about. And thanks for joining me here in what we call the Blue House.
Amazing space, amazing farm, the whole thing. It was an extraordinary day yesterday.
Awesome. Well, I wanna imagine out as I thought about secret sauce, right? I want to get into your thoughts around team, around success. I think you have some very progressive. You think you have a very progressive mindset around architecture and design, around building a company and a culture. But I want to start just imagining 10 years out. And I was thinking, okay, I was on my way up here. I'm listening to how I built this. And I was like, okay, if Christian's on this show, and the host has him on in 10 years, and he says, okay, Christian, how did you do it? How did you achieve every goal that you'd set out for the next 10 years? How would you actually respond to that question? How would you look back and say, here's how I did it?
Interesting. So it's first of all, being on that show would be amazing. So I don't know, I'd have to think about 10 years in advance. I would assume that my sort of overall goals over the next 10 years will probably evolve. While I have sort of a very set idea of what I want to accomplish, I do like to think that as it evolves, it changes and matures, or maybe it doesn't mature, it goes backwards, and we have to kind of start over in certain areas. But to be on that show, I will have had to achieve sort of beyond just being an architecture and design firm, which is in fact one of the goals, right? I think, to be and I don't want to be insulting about this, but just an architect or just a designer on that show, I don't think would be very interesting to that particular audience, right? There are literally thousands of wonderful design firms and thousands of wonderful architects and designers out there that I think, are way more talented than me, that for that reason alone could be on that show. But if I were to be there, 10 years from now, I mean, when I think about our business plan, right? We have a strategic plan. It's not very robust in terms of, it's not 30 pages long. It's really only one page. It's a one-page plan. And in the next 5 years, my goal is to be double the size that we are now in terms of revenue coming in and people. But then the plan from 5 to 10 years from then is to be 10 times the size. So a very, very steep incline 5 years from now, starting to really, really take off. And so to achieve that, I will have had to, or not just me, the entire team will have had to figure out sort of this blend of design, architecture, technology, and the process, and how to kind of string all of that together and make it, it's not going to ever be a click of a button and boom, there's something designed, right? It's a very, for as tech advanced as we are in terms of our process, it's still a very human process. There is there's a lot of listening that goes on, and really active listening. So when we're designing a space for a particular client, we're in our lab and we've got our software up and the designer's doing their thing. There's a computer programmer, developer in the room as well. And the goal of many of the people in that room is really just to listen and to hear what the client is saying, to begin to interact with them. And then the technology is beginning to kind of pull all of that together and realize the client's vision immediately, ideally, but pretty quickly within a design session.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in this when you said be more than just an architect and designer. I wonder if you're hinting at something beyond Mancini Duffy into a more broader sense. Okay, are you imagining that not just for you, but across the board, is it not going to be enough to be an architecture and design firm 10 years from now? Are you going to have to be technology consultants, technology firms? I mean, are you seeing that shift for the whole industry?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing a shift, right? I think that sort of traditional design practice will always exist in some way. But if we really want to make a change and we really want to evolve like other industries do, there's going to be a defining moment somewhere in the next 10 years that shifts the way architects work. And yes, it'll probably be some sort of tech-related thing. Hopefully it's the things that we're creating that do that, but it may not be, obviously. So I think there's got to be... there's something else out there for the process and ultimately for the end result. I mean, you see it now, especially post-pandemic, right? You see, just if we look at office in general, right? The office is changing, and I think it's changing probably for the good. It's very uncomfortable for those that design offices, such as myself, and probably a lot of the other architecture firms. And I think right now we're getting into I can kind of sense it, right? We're pretending it's going to all go back to be exactly how it was, even though we all know that it's not. Oh, it's just going to be more open plan. Oh, it's just going to be an experience center. Oh, it's just going to be hybrid work. But I think we haven't even begun to figure out what that is. And so those types of events that occur that make major shifts, we're very slow in the design, architecture, interior world to react to it. We're never ahead of it, right? We're never saying, okay, well, this is exactly how people should work, or this is how people should live. And I think when architects have done, this is how people should live in the past, it's yielded pretty much disasters, right? Some of the high-rise buildings in New York City where people, the early Corbu plans of people living in high-rises and coming down only to common space, it never really kind of worked out that way.
That's really interesting because it's a little bit of a conundrum, right? Is the future ours to design, or is the future ours to design for?
Mm-hmm.
And, it's like, do we shape the future, or are we just responding to it as designers?
Yeah.
I would say, are you saying we're somewhere in the middle there?
I think right now we're always reactionary, right? I think there's been periods where we tried to go ahead, but we went a little bit too far and not ever thinking about the human, the person actually living there, the person actually using space, right? When architects design, and not all, but most, they think of form first and what is this going to look like? How is it going to fit in the site? They think of every single possible thing other than the human. And so I think what the pandemic has taught us is the human, in the end, really kind of drives the experience there. And if we can shift that mindset a bit, I think we can be successful in steering the actual design side of things.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. Now, you mentioned your team earlier when you were projecting, right? The future. You talked about your team. Hey, you hope they all stay. They're going to be a big part of this ride. Let's talk about team building.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something you're looking for in a team member? Is there a trait or is there characteristics? And are you looking for a variety of things? Is there one common thread that you want to see in everybody? I want to know how would you help our audience develop the right team?
Okay. So that for me has evolved over time. Probably not the actual reasoning as to why I picked someone over another, but my ability to actually understand it and my ability to act on it, right? So over time, I listen to sort of, hey, this person's really good, you should interview them, and then all of these sources that kind of come at you for whatever reason. And the more I would interview people or the more I would meet people, I would be swayed, quite frankly, by, well, this is the school that they went to. This is the portfolio that they showed. Oh, this person really wants me to hire this person. I should do that. Maybe I'll get something else as a result of it, right? It's really been only the last 10 years or so where I have learned to just kind of trust my gut, but it doesn't mean I've always acted on my gut. And I will tell you that in the past probably year is really only where I've only acted on my gut, right? And I think we touched on this yesterday when we were kind of tooling around and at the OFS farm, in terms of the owner of OFS, right? And that how he goes a lot with his instinct and not necessarily with what might be the thing on paper to do.
Right.
And it's taken me a long time to train myself, even though I know that's the right thing to do. It's taken me a long time to really kind of trust my instincts and live with them ultimately in the end, or why I can't quite figure out why this person is the right fit. But what I've learned to figure out about people as the right fit, I can almost make that judgment call within the first 2 minutes of a conversation or even less. And it's just it's a feeling that I have, right? Oh, this person will gel well with the group. And what is the group? The group is the firm or the leadership group. It's a very diverse group. I love when it's not predictable as to how someone's going to react to what I say or what my partner Bill might say or what our other partners might say. I don't want to be surrounded. Go ahead.
That's an interesting comment. You like when it's unpredictable how someone will react to something you say. Like, I've never heard that before. That's just an interesting
I love being
think about.
challenged because and I even in a in looking for someone, right? The fact that, look, people have to fit in a certain way, right? They can't be pompous. They can't, think that they're the smartest in the room, that kind of thing. They have to be smarter than me, and that's honestly not very difficult to do. So I'm all for that. But yeah, I want someone to say to me, hey, stop chasing that shiny object, dude. This isn't part of the plan. Get back in line. I need people to freely be able to express themselves and say that, or hey, Christian, maybe you're not thinking of this part of that. This comes up a lot, especially when it comes to HR issues and cultural issues. I'm a giver. I mean, my CFO calls me Santa Claus, or her new thing is now that she calls me Oprah, right? You get a car and you get a car. I love making people, excited about what they're doing, about their job, and being rewarded for it. I'm to this day, I am so thankful that people want to work for us and that they want to give their time and their energy and their thought. Like it blows me away that people actually want to work for me or for us. It's just, I don't know. I don't understand it. It's weird.
That's cool. I mean, just that attitude alone, when we talk about secret sauce, like I wonder if that's part of it. I hope we're starting to kind of get those ingredients, figure out the recipe there. Is there anything else when I say secret sauce? Is there anything else that comes to mind?
Secret sauce. So I think that thankfulness is something that I try to express. Again, it's genuine, right? I really am thankful that people are putting their time and effort into this. And, if I can express that properly to someone, I think it creates a sense of loyalty, and not because I'm trying to create a sense of loyalty, but because they know I genuinely am loyal, and I want to see their career mature, and I want them to make more money. I want to see the company make more money so that the individuals can make more money. And that's something that I express constantly.
How do we get out of this kind of transactional relationship, employee, employer? I feel like that transactional relationship really does sometimes hold back good ideas, or hold back, it makes people play it safe. It just changes how you feel about work. And it's like, man, if you can transcend that, there's so much opportunity on the other side of that.
Yeah, if there's vested interest on the other end, and I think of some individuals at our company that are very, very into what we're doing, right? And no matter how busy they are, if something else comes up, they take ownership of it immediately. And that's something that's really, so when I'm looking for people to come to the firm, that's the best quality that I can try to find in someone. And it's hard to get out on an interview other than it's a hunch, right? And you're asking someone, what did you do on this project? Or how did you lead this? Or how did you lead that? And there's a certain way that people answer questions that you think, okay, they stepped up, right? It was important to them to, not just for the project, not just for their career, but for the client. It was really important for them to do whatever it might have been. And that's a quality that's really difficult to find. And when you find it, those are the people ultimately that can help really scale the business.
So, I listen to you speak, and, especially when you talk about your team, that's when you break into the smile. Okay. And it's like, you're a pretty driven person. You can tell because you've got 10-year goals. I mean, you're thinking out, and your goals are big, but you're also a very happy person, right? And so this combination of being driven, being happy, where does optimism play into your career, into, I don't know, just the way you carry yourself, your life? Do you think about optimism? Like, is it something you're trying to understand? Or is it just something you have?
I can tell you that it's something that I have, but I can tell you I know the exact moment that I started thinking about it. And that was probably 7 or 8 years ago. We were working with a coach, a coach called a scaling up coach. And this guy was hardcore. I mean, he really held our feet to the fire. I mean, he really whipped us into shape, which was good. And because I was new to the ownership side, we were growing, we were expanding, and we needed organization and some sort of system. And we had no system. And so in the beginning of the quarterly meetings with this person, you had to go around the room and say, the one thing that was affecting you. And it was always my job to go last. And for whatever reason, we must have been, I don't know what the scenario was, I don't know why, but for whatever reason, everyone around the table, and there was probably 8 or 9 of us at the time, everyone around the table had like some sort of doom and gloom thing that was bothering them, right? And it was like, wow, okay, that sucks. And okay, ooh, that was bad. Ooh, that was bad. That was bad. And I remember feeling, and I don't remember what it was that was the issue that was bothering us, but I remember feeling the exact same as everyone around the table. But something happened in my mind where I said to myself, well, maybe everybody's looking at me here. And if I say the same thing, which was true, man, I'm going to, what a defeatist attitude here. This meeting's going to go nowhere. And we got, I think we had 8 hours straight going with him.
Oh.
So when it got to me, I don't know what it is that I said, but I know I turned that negative somehow into being positive, and that we could be optimistic as we looked at whatever that issue was. And I remember seeing everybody's face around the table like brighten up, And I thought, oh, look at that. Like, boom, the mood changed instantaneously. And so from that moment on, I was more conscious of, wait, if I talk about no matter what the issue is, that there's positive in the issue, that we can actually turn it into a positive. And it's very cliche, right? I mean, turn
Sure.
a negative into a positive.
Yeah, lemonade out of lemons. Right?
Exactly, yeah. But it's true. And I think people do look to me for that, which is great and scary, because while I am extremely optimistic and I think very highly of our team and our company, me personally, I question myself a lot, right? And if I'm being honest, I, as optimistic as I am on the outside, sometimes on the inside, I don't know, I know that it'll probably work out, but I'm not exactly sure the path to get to that point.
Is that self-doubt or is that situational doubt?
No, that's self-doubt for sure. For sure. I might have said this in the past, but my parents, I grew up, I was not a good student in high school, in grammar school and in middle school. Terrible in middle school. I remember, and I think of my daughter who's so good in middle school. I'm like, oh, thank God. I remember coming home and it was very different, obviously, now. You know how you can see like real time, grades of your kids like instantaneously throughout the day if you want.
You didn't have to wait for that report card to come in the mail.
So my report cards would come and they were terrible. I mean, I would get whatever the equivalent of Fs were and Ds were. I think it was like unsatisfactory or something like that. Terrible. I was a terrible learner. I mean, my parents had me in extra reading, growing up. But one thing my parents did was they kept me extremely confident in myself. And I don't know how they did it, but they kept me confident, right? They always said, no, you're amazing. You're amazing. Like a good parent should, right?
Right.
And that stuck with me. And you don't need to worry about books and you don't need to worry about fitting in school. You'll figure it out. You'll figure it out. And they kept that going. Something clicked along the way in high school where I figured out, oh, okay, I know how to do this stuff. Or maybe the math doesn't come as easy to me, or maybe I don't comprehend the reading as quickly as the other person. But if I read it 2 or 3 times, I do remember it, and I can actually, bring it back and use the skills that I need to in life. So I think that there's always a little bit of self-doubt on my end because of that early sort of childhood experience of not being a great student and to having to work harder. But I really think my work ethic that my parents put in me and what I figured out along the way made me kind of who I am. Because I will outwork anybody nonstop. I mean, you might have seen a bit of it. I'm late to everything, right? So the reason I'm late to dinner last night, the reason I'm late to breakfast this morning is because I'm working to the very last moment.
But I do think there's this correlation between optimism and being late. Because you always believe you can just fit one more thing in, right?
Exactly.
And it's that optimism, right?
Exactly. I've convinced myself that it takes me 15 minutes to get ready in the morning when I know it takes 30.
Yeah.
But every day I don't learn.
You can do it, right? You're going to get it in 15 this time.
Exactly.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean, it does sound like a heavy pace to keep up. You host a podcast.
Yep.
The Anti-Architect. Okay. I think it's kind of cool that here you host a podcast and you're strategically calling out, some of the problems with architecture and the process. You get to talk to colleagues, other architects, right? It's really not about competitiveness or anything. It's about advancing the profession. And we all talk to our peers, right? That happens quite frequently. But we both know when you hit record, the conversation is different, right? Mm-hmm. Things change. Are there some things that you've really learned from hosting this podcast? From number one, from being a host, right? And then also just from having these recorded dialogues with other architects. Like, what are some of those big takeaways?
Yeah. So, being a host is obviously something new to me. I'm not as good as you, that's for sure.
I doubt that.
But no, it's. I think that's a whole other learning curve, right? That was, I had never done it till we hit record on the first one. I kind of went through, like you, in my head, kind of what I was going to say to people and maybe how they would react. And I had these sort of, shower conversations with myself. But until you actually sit down to do it, you can't really experience it, right? And then the fact that that's going to be, there's no throwaways as far as I was concerned, we're going for it, right? And I probably picked, to me, I'd love to have him on, the smartest guy I know, which is this guy, Jan, who owns Boqueria restaurants. And I look back on that episode, and I could do so much more on that episode. So one day I'm going to have him back and we'll redo it. But that's certainly a learning curve in terms of how to host a conversation. It's different than having lunch with somebody, right? It's different than just kind of having a drink with somebody. There's a formality to it, no matter how informal you're trying to be. And I think as the host, as you know, you've got to present sort of a structure, right? Whether they know it or not. And there's got to be some theme in your head that you're trying to, get them to talk about and achieve. I think the most interesting thing about, especially interviewing other architects and engineers, is surprisingly how honest they are about the profession. And I think that's something that honestly was one of the goals of the podcast, was to have an open and honest dialogue about, what's messed up in our profession. As I've said, there are amazing things in our profession. The education system's amazing. There are so many wonderful parts and pieces to this profession, but there's also stuff that desperately needs to be improved. And I think the way you can improve it is through honest talk about it, honest dialogue. And I think what I realize is that we need to do more of this as a profession. It shouldn't just be me, talking about what's under the hood of an architecture firm, or why we don't work well with engineers.
Why don't you work well with engineers?
I think because from my experience now on the podcast of having several awesome engineers on, architects don't care about what's behind the walls or above the ceiling. And that's kind of a waste of money as far as they're concerned. They'd rather have that beautiful finish or that really nice exterior. And the fact that you can have all of this stuff that costs probably more than the finished product, and nobody sees it, who cares about that crap?
That's funny.
But also, we don't talk enough, right? There's a competition for whatever reason. The way that our profession is set up is immediately to compete with one another, even if you're on the same team. And there are other methods of delivering projects that I think some areas in the country do well, like integrated project delivery, IDP. That's not something that's done very often in the New York or Northeast region, maybe even, the sort of the Northeast half of the United States. It's really more of a West Coast thing. And that's where everybody gets on the same team. They're under there's a contract that's formed, a sort of a separate company that's formed, and everyone works towards a goal, a financial goal, a metrics goal, whatever those goals are. And if those goals are achieved, everybody is rewarded with some sort of payout in the end and some sort of percentage. The client wins because everything's fitting within that budget, everything's figured out ahead of time, right. And it's in everybody's best interest to have an open dialogue of, hey, that stuff that you have behind the ceiling that I don't really care about, I care about it now because we're all on the same team and I really want to see it work. And not only do I want to see it look nice in terms of where it goes, but I also want to see it, financially perform or for whatever other metric might have been defined along the way. But the profession right now is set up to, the architect, maybe holds the engineer's contract or maybe doesn't. It doesn't hold the civil engineer, it doesn't hold the structural engineer, or maybe they do. And so you can be on the same team, you're working on the same project, but you're not necessarily working in the same method. And so we've got to align all of that some way and get on the same page. And I think, at least with the architects and engineers that I've spoken to on the podcast, they're very interested in open dialogue and having a conversation, picking up the phone and saying, hey, I think I messed this up, or hey, I think you messed this up, and not it being, I'm not going to talk to you, or absolutely not. Now we have a legality problem, right? So yeah, so there's that open dialogue that I'm starting to see, and I see those themes emerging as the podcast progresses.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know if that was the purpose of the podcast, but it's great that that's showing its head, that's coming out. This idea. I mean, if you think about a building, all the stuff in it, I don't know that there's a more complex project, in any profession than dealing with it. Maybe putting on the Olympics. Okay. Like whoever's doing that, right? That's a big deal.
It's pretty hard.
Yeah. Let's talk about interiors a little bit. Is the relationship between interiors and architecture ever a relationship of tension, or do you feel like that's in a pretty good place right now? And compare it now to 10 years ago.
Yeah, so it's always in tension. No matter what I do, it's always in tension. I don't understand. I even thought about this the other day. I was touring someone through the office, and I said, "Oh, our office is broken up into studios, and this is the interior side, and that's the architecture side." It's really not true. Even in our own office, and I'm standing there in front of one of the main architecture project managers. I'm like, why did I say that? It doesn't even make sense, because that's kind of how it is in my mind, but it isn't really. So why is that? So there is always this tension between interiors and architecture, and in a firm like ours where we do both, it's probably less so than in other firms. But we try to structure our teams to have both architects and interior designers and kind of cross-pollinate all of those. I am very much a believer that if you're in this profession and you've done one or two interiors projects, you can certainly do an architecture project. You may not be able to, detail the complex curtain wall systems or understand, why the drainage has to come into a building and then out of the building. And honestly, even if as an interior designer, you can pick that up as you get experience. Even the educated architect doesn't really know that until they've seen it, a few times actually get built and understand why and how it all works. So we do try to staff our projects sort of not looking at, well, this is what this person only does interiors and this person only does architecture. We do really try to cross-pollinate, and that's the best way of doing it. I also think because of our system, the technology side of things, because we're very team-focused, everybody's on the same team and everybody's working in the same piece of software that we've invented, and everybody's working with the client in the room. And there's no, well, that's the interior person's problem or that's the architect's problem. They'll figure that out later. You're figuring it out as you go. And so that begins to solve a lot of those issues. But I'm sure at other firms, it's definitely something that, they don't like each other on either side of the aisle.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it seems to be, firm to firm, there might be a different stance on this subject. I was just curious on your take.
But in terms of 10 years, has it evolved in 10 years? I think absolutely. My previous firm, there was a big divide between architecture and interiors, and we sat in separate locations and we never spoke to one another. I think the 3D modeling in general, because you're working, even if you're not working in our software, and if you're working in just the typical architecture software, which is Revit, you're working in a cloud-based version of it. You're all working together on the same model. So just the fact that, if I'm working on the exterior and the interior designer's working on the interior, I have to take parts of that model with me to work on it locally, and then I have to bring it back. There's a dialogue that's happening, whether we want it to happen or not, just by the fact that I've got to actually now talk to this person and say, by the way, this is what I'm working on inside the model that you're actually holding.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I mean, you're here. I've got you on camera, which is rare,
I
right?
forgot
Which
that,
is
by the way.
super, yeah, super awesome to be sitting with you on camera. Is there anything you wanted to put out in the world? Is there anything that you were hoping? Is there a question you were hoping? Gosh, I hope you asked me this.
Well, you asked about the podcast, which is great. I think putting out in the world is, I'd love to invite people's feedback on the podcast, right? And what are some, if other architects and designers are watching and listening to this, what are the things that they think I should ask, other architects and other designers or even clients about what do architects do well? What do we not do so well? What are some shared experience of things that have gone wonderful and why, and what are some things that have been an absolute train wreck and why, and how can we solve for those kind of things? So, I'm looking for as much feedback as people are willing to give me, and enough ammunition to kind of to enhance and kind of take the podcast to the next level, because I think we're on to something, right? And there's themes that are emerging about what architects do well and don't do well, right? And or what annoys you. I think my first question is, what annoys you about other architects, or what do architects do well or not do well that is annoying? So more questions like that. I'd love to kind of hear people's thoughts on that, because as I said, I want to really dive deeper and get into people's emotions and get some honesty out of that, and have people, be more vulnerable as they come on to really talk about what it is and how we can improve our profession.
Oh, I love the work you're doing there with the Anti-Architect.
Thank you.
I love the core purpose behind it. And I think we're getting to this secret sauce. I'm excited actually to listen back on this conversation and think about, okay, what are those ingredients?
Okay, cool. Yeah, you got to tell me what the secret sauce is.
If you enjoyed today's episode, we would really appreciate a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening. To discover more design stories, visit us at ofs.com/imagineaplace. From OFS, I'm Doug Shapiro, and you've been listening to Imagine a Place.